We are live and still leaning and figuring our frame out. Good morning, Dr. Max McKeown. Boom.
Good morning,
Look at
Alice. Yeah. Look, yeah.
Maybe if we both lean uncomfortably, we can get a
I think I'm leaning comfortably now. I think that this is good. Hello, everybody.
Good morning. In fact, good evening, I believe it is. Tell us where you're calling in from.
I'm calling in from the UK, Leeds, north of England. Yeah, that's where I'm leaning in from.
You're leaning in? Oh, we could use this as a whole physical metaphor about how we're leaning into something. What are we leaning at? What are you leaning into right now?
I'm leaning into, I think I'm leaning into some nice class brains.
Oh, that's the cup.
I'm leaning into, yeah, Pokemon, lots of things.
All right, so you're leaning into Pokemon, you're leaning into frame. So it's quite exciting here in New Zealand today, and I've done some very comprehensive research ahead of this conversation, which consists of Googling what's happening in London about 7 minutes ago. And I understand that, so in New Zealand today, it is the first day out of lockdown for us. So we've entered level 2 as of midnight. So it's currently 9 a.m. here, which means we have cafes open. People can go to work. We've had people lining up for haircuts since midnight. So it's all a bit new here today. What's the status in England?
I think it's a very particular kind of British we've gone with. You know, we've gone slow into it and then fast into denial, and now we're somewhere in what is being termed British common sense, which means that I mean, everybody knows it, but it's something like we've got 5 levels and we're somewhere in between 1 and 5. Nobody's entirely certain. And then the only thing that's unlawful is being outside of your house without a reasonable reason, but everything else is kind of semi-allowed.
What does that mean?
Well, this has been a big question about, but we know that the aim is to save lives and to get the economy going again. I think that's broadly it. But the in-between, as you know, Alice, the in-between where you are, agreement on where you are and agreement on where you're going to and then how to get there, that's where it gets confusing.
Shit. That does sound confusing, because as soon as we provide grey area, hey, as long as it's reasonable, it's fine, we're in trouble, right?
Yeah, and if you haven't understood it, you're not seeking to understand it more, and I think as soon as multiple levels of strategy start coming in, so you don't know whether you're looking to is succeeding or failing at their strategy if you don't know what it is. So if you're facing somebody whose strategy really is about political power, and they've got political power, then you could conclude really that they are successful, even if you think that they're a terrible failure because, I don't know, there's a war or people are dying or people are poor or there's prejudice. You know, you might think, oh, this is crazy, this leader of ours, they're awful. But if they're in power and that was their only objective, maybe they're a very successful strategist within their scope. Somebody else is paying the price for their goals.
It's a reframe. Okay, well, we've managed to go. We've managed to go approximately 2 minutes before we talk about strategy. So clearly, we are both nerds on this, and I love it. But okay, so if you Google Max McKeown, you find out. All right, you're a strategist. You're an author. You're a speaker. You're a scientist. How do your parents describe what you do?
My parents? Oh, I don't know. He's still my brilliant little boy. I hope. I mean, both my parents are still alive. So I would have thought that my mother would just say, hey, you were always amazing and you drew things and I always knew you the best. I mean, I've got 3 brothers and a sister and I'm the eldest. So they probably don't agree and they're pretty competitive and so on. And my father just thinks I'm the nice guy who takes him out to dinner. And it was always his best friend. I don't think they'd really pay any attention to what I do. Do your parents know what you do?
Oh God, no.
As a strong female
and it's
character?
An interesting one, because people ask my children often say to me, yeah, my kids say that they don't know what I don't know. She she like has meetings, and she wrote a book, and I don't know, she talks about stuff, maybe strategy, but I don't really know what that means. And so I find it really interesting, because we walk around like, aren't we very interesting and important with our jobs? But then it's like, what do people actually know about what it's like to do what you do? So what do you think people misunderstand about what it is that you do for a job?
Well, I mean, strategy as a subject, which is where I am. I studied it. That's what my doctorate's in, strategy. That's what I do for a living. That's what I write about. And whether it's innovation strategy or adaptability strategy, it's still the same thing. So I suppose it depends what your preconceptions of strategy are. A lot of my work is about trying to rescue strategy from what has been done to it. I think they're a very, that we're a strategic animal, Homo strategos, I guess. We're a strategic animal. That's our thing. That's the thing we do better than other animals, or differently to other animals.
We being humans.
But we humans, yeah, not all, but like I've been gardening like everybody else, and I've loved it. I've loved all the animals around me, and the robins coming down, and they're all living their lives, building their nests, mating, having their little fledglings. They're doing stuff, but what they can't really do is stop and consider whether the robin should behave a bit more like a pigeon, or they should develop, mechanical teeth in order to attack the cat. We're the animals who get to do that kind of stuff. So
that's quite special, isn't it? So we have this unique ability to be able to live a bit meta and reflect on how our behavior or how our choices fit in a bigger picture, and go, should we do something different about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right at the heart of it, and that's the philosophy of strategy. If we're throwing in interesting things, I mean, to me, everything human is strategic. It's on levels. You're really great at it, or you're really shit at it, or you're really successful, or it's a failure. It depends. And so, in this case, it's such. It's saying we are free to choose, we are condemned to choose, but what are we going to choose, and how well?
We are free to choose. We are condemned to choose. I really like that. I'm keeping that. I'm putting that on a Post-it note, and I'm sticking it on my wall.
I mean, Sartre would know. He might know from the grave that you stop. But yeah, and it depends, though. I paused for a second. It's excellent. But then you said, I don't believe he did, it depends on how free you feel. And it depends on the levels of choice you have before you. So, if you're in a restaurant, you said the cafes have opened again. If you're free to go to a cafe, you could choose to go to a cafe. If you know that there's a menu, you can choose from the menu. If you're a friend of the restaurateur and you want something that's not on the menu, you can choose what's not on the menu. And some people would choose to have a protest, and some people would choose to try to shut the restaurant down. There are many choices, but we can only choose a choice of which we are aware.
I think that's really interesting. And if I think about the environment that we've been living in for the last however many weeks, where we've had more constrained options or a more constrained sense of choice than I think many of us have experienced in our lives, at least in a big contextual level, that interplay between what are we free to do and what are we constrained by, and how is that a gift and how is it a problem, is probably more on people's minds than it has been before. I mean, you and I have been rattling on about this for years, about the beauty of constraints and the possibility of choice and how to think in and outside of a box. And it all seems very academic until you're faced with a situation where, hey, you're stuck in your house for a few weeks. You can either choose to feel entirely boxed in, or you can choose to make the best of it. What does that look like for you? And I don't think that's ever been more of a thing for the general population, at least not in the very privileged version of the modern industrialized world that we live in.
Yeah, very much. So your assumptions have changed. You're no longer meant to go to work before you should go to work. And you're not allowed to exercise, but you were meant to exercise before. So those are all reversed. And then and then it's been fascinating seeing it globally as well. So countries that have similar levels of wealth have still reacted to this in very different ways, about the competencies of their government, about the collaboration, so how well integrated knowledge is with action and decisions, that kind of thing. I think that has been fascinating. And then seeing the very strong individualist societies sometimes rejecting this altogether and saying, well, we won't do it, even if it's for our own good. You know, Elon Musk's busy opening his factories. Is that smart? Isn't it smart? Is that part of his rebel thing? Is it good for his strategy? It's it's impossible to tell right now.
Well, it just inspires a bit of perspective and a bit of empathy. I mean, one of the first things that came out of it, at least here in New Zealand and Australia, was that the first response of government, even before we'd finalised the lockdown announcement, was income and business support, where we went, if normal ordinary people can't earn in the way that they're used to, we better quickly make sure they've still got money, because turns out it's quite hard to live if you don't have secure income. Oh, is that right? Well, bloody hell, said the poor, vulnerable and disenfranchised for hundreds of years. You're kidding. And it took the middle class to be affected in order for us to actually think about a universal basic income, or something that, I mean, I'm probably going to get a political backlash for this. Sorry, LinkedIn. But essentially, we've provided a universal basic income over the last few weeks, and it took the middle class to get knocked off their perch for us to get it.
Well, you have a similar thing in the US and in the UK, that idea that a minute ago it was impossible, it was unaffordable, and now suddenly it's the right thing to do. And that goes a little bit back to what I was saying, that the menu has extended, the possible choices have extended, and what's left, it'll be very interesting to judge in a few months or years what has remained. So the World War showed in the UK that leaders weren't necessarily clever, and that everybody fought together. Something like that. I mean, lots of things. But as soon as the war was over, that's what the population concluded, that it needed smarter, more enlightened leadership, and it adopted a health system and a health. So politics aside, that's what they decided, and that's what many countries decided. It stuck, at least, well, for the next 100 years, you know, whatever.
So what I like about that you said about the menu, is that it's not necessarily that the choices have changed. It's that our visibility of what's going on has changed. And so none of the things that we have grappled with and adopted or rejected since lockdown weren't there before. So thinking about remote working, or thinking about responsible travel, or thinking about guaranteed income, or supporting business, or changing the way that we work so that it's less, you know, that whole basis of the capitalist system, or whatever you want to call it, around the way that we consume and produce and live and work and travel. Those questions, they're not new. They were there before, but our visibility of them is what's shifted. And the way that we now approach solving those problems as a society seems to be shifting.
Yeah, it seems there will have been a few things that have emerged that really were inventions of the past few months. A few things. I mean, for instance, just having mapped the DNA of the virus. You know, just a few things exist that didn't exist. A few things. But primarily, everything already existed. We're becoming more aware of them, as you said, but also people's willingness to listen to the crazies, or at least the people to the edge of what people thought was acceptable before. That has certainly altered, and that happens in wars as well. People become desperate, and then they start listening to crazy people, by which I mean really clever people. They're not really crazy, they're just more enlightened, I think, and they're clever people who don't,
except when they're actually crazy and saying things like 5G caused coronavirus.
Yeah, and that's why I pause from crazy. Although, you know, in my work, a little, because everybody's crazy, you know, one person's crazy as another person's innovator. It kind of depends. And if I talk about releasing radical thinking, well, of course, I don't mean blowing people up. I don't mean imprisoning people for crossing a border. I mean something else. I mean, you know, getting rid of the border.
So it's all contextual, right?
It is, but certainly it's the case that ideas that were thought impossible have become possible, And that's the way that innovation and strategy really interact. So if you're looking at the key questions, there's always driving forces and there's always resisting forces. And what's happened here is the forces driving have made those things resisting less important. And people say, well, look, we've got to do something.
Isn't that interesting? Because the things are all the same, but and so I have this theory about change that as much as we like to think that we are these very innovative, self-propelled, strategic humans, and some of us are, actually what our threshold needs to be for how painful something is before we'll finally go, okay, fine, I'll transform. It's actually quite high. Like we will tolerate quite a lot of discomfort before we finally change ourselves as a rule. And that's true whether it's
something
leaving a relationship or leaving a job, or no matter what, we're like, fine, I'll finally change.
But some people kind of like pain too. So some people like pain, some people like challenge, some people like pressure, some people like kind of what they don't like. They say privilege of pressure. I want to be the best tennis player in the world. Well, that's, yes, you'd be wealthy, but it's a pretty crap life, and it's a big bet. That's a lot of practice for just a few successful places. So I think it depends in psychology, that qualified psychologist as well, but there's avoidance and there's approach. There's people who really go towards the challenge, and there's people who back off. And that very much differs. And in this situation, some people are enlivened by this and some people are cowed, and they're in the fetal position, and they say, please never let me have to go to work, I might possibly die. And another person says, hey, fuck it, I don't care about this at all. Something's going to kill me eventually. Let me at it. And these aren't necessarily good or bad. What's good or bad?
Yeah, and those pre-existing kind of inclinations where you're more inclined to go one way or the other, to run toward the challenge or away from it. It's like the last few weeks or months have kind of amplified that. So if you were already inclined in one direction, it's now everything's been dialed up. And if you were the, I see opportunities and I like pressure person, then you've taken this one and gone, yes, let's go. I'm about innovation and let's change everything about our business model and the way we work, and let's change society. And if you were already a bit risk averse and like, I don't know, I'll sit over here, you're now like, I'll just put my track pants on and watch Netflix. Thank you. See you later. And then it's kind of very just done there.
I think very much climate has altered, and that has revealed different sides of people. Although, again, because of national culture, it's very interesting how some of those who think of themselves as rebellious and exciting and innovative don't really know where to put it currently. So they don't want to be, a silly, sort of a stupid idiot. Yeah. So they don't want to go onto the street and infect people, but they would like to be exciting. Very few of us can do the Elon Musk and just go, well, whatever, I'll just do it if I want to. In New Zealand, I think that would be almost impossible. But even if you could, the New Zealand culture surely would be, listen, we are solid. We're all in this together. She's okay. And even if I didn't vote for her, we're New Zealanders. So even if you're a crazy person, you're not that crazy.
Totally. And I've been thinking about this choice thing. And I'd actually quite like to call to the chat really quickly before we go on and just see if anyone's got any questions really for either of us about how some of that new thinking or choice making or strategy works in the environment we're in at the moment. Because I know for those of you who are watching us at the moment from New Zealand, you're all sitting in the same kind of place I am today, which is like, things just got different again. What are we going to do now? We have all this opportunity. What should we do? So any of your questions or comments, I would love to see them. So please look at chucking those on now. But something I've often thought about over the years, and I've talked to my good mate about a number of times, is sometimes the real advantages that we get of thinking through constraints or within constraints. And so my best mate and I have, in a lot of ways, very similar lives. We're the same age, we grew up in the same place, We've had a similar education, we've done similar work. But where we've diverged is that, so I was a teen mum. I had my first child when I was 16, and I went through university with children. I've got 3 children. I've been married, and I've had a really sort of interesting back life. I was in state care, and I guess I've had all these really interesting constraints and challenges that have shaped my experience of exactly the same stuff that my mate has had, but put me in a different spot. And it's meant that my choices have been a lot more limited, right? So the hours that I can work, the locations that I can choose to work in, the kind of jobs that I could look at taking, and those constraints have shaped a particular version of my life. And for my friend, he's been able to do whatever he likes, right? So he's never had any kids, never been tied into a long-term relationship, and travel the world and do what he likes.
Yeah.
And he's often bemoaned that lack of constraint to me and gone, Alicia, the fact that you've got such a limited window to work in and had such limited space your whole life to make decisions in seems to have really given you an edge. He's like, it's focused your attention.
Does this mean you're more successful than he is?
Well, I would never say anything like that. But in terms,
but does he think that? I mean, I'm just wondering, why does somebody say that? Does he think that you're you're just smarter than he is?
Going, shit, you've done a whole bunch more stuff that I might like to have done, but I didn't have to channel it. And so he's still in a what do I want my life to be spot. Whereas I'm a bit more like, all right, I think I've figured out what I might want out of this bit anyway. And in a lot of ways, those constraints have been and those motivations and needs and drivers have been a real advantage for me, because I'm like, well, I've got no choice but to hustle. I've got 3 kids to feed. I need to get out there and make some money. I don't have time to find myself. And also, like, right, I've got to get on. I've got to get to work, and I've got to do that in a way that works around everybody. And I don't have time to sit around and wonder and feel sorry about it. I've just got to make it happen.
But you've got, of course, one of the things you found about yourself on your T-shirt. So
yeah, totally. Like, and I've got 3 of them in my house too.
yeah, there is something about. I mean, I've got 4 children. I think it's interesting though that constraints and situations are only constraints and situations to a point. And what I try to do is I look at in adaptability how some 2 or more people have been in broadly the same situation and it's turned out quite differently, and why that might be. And this isn't about some kind of blaming, saying, hey, everybody can make it out of a bad situation. Of course, that's impossible. But even so, isn't it interesting to learn from somebody who starts from where you started, wherever that was, and then you say, hey, this is how they did it. That's a good template. And I can copy until I reach a new template point, and then I'll copy somebody else, rather than assuming that Richard Branson is a genius. I mean, he was born rich. His parents gave him a personal Coots account. So yes, he did some shit. EasyJet, Stelios, he was born rich. His dad gave him a jet for his birthday from shipping money.
We leave that bit out of the story, don't we? We always leave that bit out of the story. I think we might have a couple of comments in the chat. Just calling to Cam. What have we got, Cam?
Tim Barry's asked, how do we exploit, as New Zealanders, our new perceived global competency to drive and improve our actual competency? Okay, that is such a brilliant question. I'm really interested in hearing your take on this one, Max. So the question is from Tim, and Tim is saying, all right, our currency is higher. So New Zealand, all of a sudden, the perception of the way that we do things has really changed. And the world is looking at us and going, hey, you guys have done all right. How do we exploit that new position, or that new position of potential influence, to actually make us not just look better, but be better? How do we work with that? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, I don't think you should. I think you should decide that British bumbling is the best of all strategies, and ignore competency. But to the extent, well, again, I think you're doing it in part yourself. So at the moment, you've got a prime minister who's got a premier who's getting all these great headlines. Some of them are about her gender, some about being a New Zealander, and you're channeling that at the moment. Why can't we have a bit more of that New Zealand strength kind of idea? But so that's one. I think lots of case studies about it. If I was from New Zealand, I'd be saying, listen, I'm going to throw lots of case studies about how this business worked and this business worked and this sector worked and this sector worked, because they're going to come to me looking for examples. And if I can give them, just like working for Toyota was good for innovation. So saying, how do we say I'm linked to this story? Let's write it up. And of course, but through that writing up, actually saying what did change. I mean, what was it? What is it? What could it be?
And what I like about the thread you're on there, Max, and I think is really important for New Zealand, Tim, is this aspect of it's about the competency here is about the knowledge and about the leadership. And so something that New Zealand struggled with from an economic standpoint is that, particularly in our provincial areas, we've had a real dependence on primary sources of production. So we've got a lot of traditional, we sell raw products is what we do. And it's been the basis of our economy for a long time. And that has shifted, and it is shifting. Worryingly shifted a lot toward tourism and international education. And then we had a pandemic and went, oh shit, that doesn't really work anymore. But I think what's interesting about that positioning standpoint and having the reputation is it's a really nice leverage point for New Zealand as a source of knowledge and a way of doing things. And I think there's something in that where if we can start to pivot our dependence on just the manual, what we do, and the primary source of production and raw materials and sending unrefined things out of the country and go, hold on, this is actually a hub of people that think differently and that make choices and can lead in hard times. And what does that mean for our industry and for our business and for politics and society? And how can we leverage that from a commercial standpoint as a source of advantage instead of having to rely on what we do? And I think repositioning New Zealand and our economy from a knowledge standpoint is the opportunity we've got in front of us, Tim.
Well, I think you put a very good point. I talk about how in competitive terms, strategic terms, you move from bloody islands to more beautiful islands to then paradise. So that's taking a lot of sophisticated analysis but into this story, and then I draw it. But so if you think of yourself at trying to get to paradise is a place where only you can do what you can do competitively, and only you understand how you do it, but everybody else can see that it's valuable. So I would suggest that one of the things that has happened here is that Sweden has been relegated somewhat with its response and is currently being viewed as a bit of a car crash, towards Bloody Island, regardless of the truth. Let's put that one to the side. But reputation-wise, suddenly people want to know your secret source because Sweden lost some. So there's a ranking thing there. Two relatively small countries doing their own thing, but you're only famous for the All Blacks and Lord of the Rings. Probably that's about it in New Zealand.
Nice to get the external analysis of our fame.
Well, you have to, if we go portraits, everyone's famous for something. Didn't he say something like Britain was only world class at making biscuits? That was it. so which wasn't much of an analysis.
You did a really good job of that for a while.
Oh, we're not the best, but we're apparently some of my ancestors who were probably working on farms while other ancestors were in the Ukraine. But some British people were good at it and enslaving people. But what I'm saying, I guess, there's a secret source here, and if you could figure out what it was, and now that everybody knows why it's so important, and other people could see that what you want to write is the New Zealand way, just like the Toyota way the book was written, and say, but what is it that's different about our thing? What makes us different?
And I love that what you've done,
what could make you. Sorry, go.
It isn't just that it's not just about finding the unique, because it's like strategy 101 or commerciality 101 is don't be everything to everyone, be the thing you are that no one else can be, and be that, right? And what I love about what you were just saying, particularly from the New Zealand front to answer Tim's question, is it's not that we've changed what we are, it's that we can all of a sudden see what we always have been and how other people have seen us. And it's that thing about don't try and sit there and work out your unique selling proposition. Ask people why they buy you. The answers might surprise you. And whatever that is, leverage on that. So if people are buying, like I thought people were buying me for my brain, it turns out they're buying me for my challenge and my energy, right? When I did that exercise a few years ago, and I went,
and you don't ever know for sure, do you? You thought it was this, and actually it was that. And I think
that's right.
Joseph Parker, the heavyweight champion, the New Zealander, he's been doing this whole series of videos that are really amusing about him throwing, say, toilet paper from his yard, great big garden, to his neighbor's yard, great big garden with a swimming pool. but a series of videos, and he's become, in fact, more popular and more of a person than he was before. So there will be, this is a magical box in a way. You have input, whatever you had to start with, and then you've got this magical space, this isolation, this lockdown, virus, whatever. Whatever you do in it is magic, and you'll remove the magician's hat, and then there'll be something. And it turns out now New Zealand are a world leader in leadership.
Yeah, of what is that? And we've had that time to go deep and reflect a little bit and do the reshape on, who are we? What is New Zealand? How do we want to do business? And how do we want to think? And what choices do we want to make for our communities? And there's been a little incubator, and now we've got some clarity on that. And on the clarity front, we've got a comment from Thomas Murray. And this is a great question. And Thomas is asking, how much clarity do we need actually to be able to do something with this? So he says, what degree of clarity do you need to make use of this crisis to affect change? Do you need a clear plan? So I guess what Thomas is asking is, like, how clearly do I need to be able to think about this to be able to do something good? Do I need a 10-point plan, or what do I need to know to be able to actually make some change out of all this stuff?
Obviously, luck is the greatest friend of any strategist. So it might just happen. Yeah, so that it's better to be lucky than good in a sense. But within this question, I think what it is in a sense is what I describe as the art loop. What you do is you always start with action because you're born. You were conceived before you had any say in it. Well, you were just describing a whole sequence of events.
I mean, I don't want to cast any aspersions on how active a conception was. I don't think that's over to us, Max, and I'm not judging. You do you.
No, but it happened without my say so. I mean, I wasn't involved in the permission thing. There was no consent on my part. Suddenly, somebody conceives me. Then I'm born. So it starts with action, and then there's a result. Action result. I see my mother's face, and I respond to it, and she teaches me to talk through noise, response. So it's action, response, thinking. And the thinking bit is what strategists do. So kind of in response to this question, it doesn't have to be all clear. What has to be clear is that we just raised an interesting question. So if we followed the quick strategy canvas, we'd say, where were we? Well, wherever New Zealand was, not a world leader in leadership. Then some shit happened, and now you have a kind of leadership position you weren't planning on, an unplanned opportunity. If you seize that strategically and then just say, what is it, iteration 1, how can we raise it, iteration 2, how can I be part of that, iteration 3, it will emerge, and then your 10, 20-point plan can come. Planning is not the same as strategy. Strategy is using what you've got to move from where you are to where you want to be. That's what strategy is. So the unplanned opportunity can have a strategic response, and Thomas doesn't need to be all clear because the opportunity will be passed by the time it's all clear. That's history. That's not strategy.
I love that. So just pick your first question or your first idea. You've seen something. You want to do something with it. You're nervous that in order to be able to create an opportunity for yourself, for your work, for your business, you need to have a really clear understanding of the next 10 steps. Why don't you respond to the first thing you've seen? Work on that basis. And something I talked actually with a group about yesterday when we were doing a decision-making session was when we approach every decision process or strategy process with the view that a curiosity to find out how you were wrong that you didn't know about yet. So you go, all right, here's what we're going to do. I wonder how I'm wrong about this and I don't know yet. How curious. Let's find out. Let's go and try this. Here's what I was wrong about and didn't realize. Brilliant. Now let me tweak and work that in. And so rather than seeing those things pop out, those assumptions that you had you didn't realize, or the events or externalities that you didn't actually account for or didn't know existed, rather than seeing those as spanners in the works or failures, seeing them as, good, I was looking for you. Thank you for presenting. Now I can improve my thinking again. It seems to be a smarter way to do things.
I think you touch on so many really valuable points. One certainly is that stability is an illusion anyway. And the brighter strategists among us, and by strategist, I don't mean someone who's just employed to be a strategist with it in their title. I mean that really.
Job, aside from you and I who get to make it up and chuck it in, is anybody really hired as a strategist?
Well, weirdly, they are. A lot of them are in advertising. They're also chief strategy
I've seen
officers
Mad Men. I know how this works.
Yeah, but you know, because we are, I mean, every book's about strategy. Every book ever written is strategy, because strategy is a theory of how things work, a theory of success or a theory of consequence. I'm going to do this and I will get that. And what you describe is an experiment. You say, wow, that's interesting. I didn't think of that, but it turns out that I noticed it. So action, result, thinking. You say, I noticed that. I wonder what I can do with it now that I noticed. And that's why innovation and strategy are so sort of tightly linked to each other. You just say, I might copy that because it works. I might copy it from somebody else because it works. Or I just noticed that something I thought didn't work does work, or the reverse. I noticed it's really cool. I mean, the Zoom guys, you know, the Zoom guys have had an amazing year. Thanks.
Zoom guys are just like, it is popping bottles in Zoom headquarters, right? Every day they're just popping bottles and patting themselves on the back and each other, surely. You've frozen on me. Come back to me, Max. The big cable under the sea is not doing its job. I mean, do I riff here? Do I hope that he comes back mid-sentence? Well, we are sitting in a frozen under the ocean cable. Does anybody else have any great questions or comments they want to pop in? We'd love to hear from you. Such a good jumping off point for a conversation to get these brilliant questions coming in. Oh, Max, you're just a loading screen for us now. I mean, the kind of questions that I'm quite keen to make sure that I ask of Max if he comes back to us over the next few minutes are really around what kind of optimism we should be having now for how we might be thinking differently. Or, oh, you're back. You're with us.
I am. I'm listening.
Oh, we missed you. We missed you desperately. So what I was starting to do in that lovely thing you have to do, which is riffing when the other person goes completely frozen or black screened, as you did for a bit there, is thinking about really what I'd like to make sure I ask of you before we finish this amazing conversation. And I guess for me, like, I'm an optimist, and what I really want to think about is, how can we be different now? What is different about the way that we think or the way that we view the world that's going to lead to something new and exciting? What are you hoping to see people think about or do differently since we've been through the experience of the last couple of months?
Well, for me, always, I'm thinking about when something new happens, any period of time, you're thinking about what to let go of, what to speed up. So it's plus minus multiplication and division, really. It's the calculator stuff.
I'm familiar with
it. So if you put that box in the middle here, and you say that this is where I was, and this is where I want to go to, and this is what I've got. You have a box, and this really happens every day and every minute. You have input and output and what you're going to do in the middle. So you might say, for instance, we were, and this is a simple and boring one, British Airways have for long wanted to close down one of their operations in the UK, and they're now going to. So you can imagine every month they thought about doing it, Gatwick, shall we close it? And they thought, well, we won't, because it'll be a lot of hassle and we'll have to send everybody home. But now they've sent everybody home and they've already got the hassle, so they're closing Gatwick. So, you know, that's done. But then other things will happen. So people will say, we really need to pedestrianize city centres completely without cars. Well, we've got pedestrianized city centres in effect without cars. The question will be, who will open them back up and who will keep them closed? Because that was your easy opportunity to do that. And the same with the rest. Are you going to say never, ever fossil fuel car again? A lot of people are making that choice. But are the manufacturers going to make that choice or not? So it's really about what you wish to plus minus multiply or divide in what is quite an interesting period. Parentheses in a formula. What are we going to have as an equal sign afterwards?
So I guess what I'm hearing from that is that you're hoping we're able to do some more of the brave letting go that we need to.
Well, because we let go of it anyway. I think what's going to be pretty weird here is it's a little bit like you you know, you go on holiday with your family and everybody's nice and relaxed and kind to each other. If that's the holiday you had, and before it was all stressful, why do you take on everything when you get home like you had to? You didn't have to. You didn't have to. You could have carried on and be nice and chill. I think it's very, very similar.
This is my favorite metaphor. And actually, I think we almost might close on that and say, look, New Zealand, England, the world, all of you who are watching, we've just been on kind of a family holiday. And in many ways, we were able to bring the best versions of ourselves to that, the best versions of our lives, of our personalities, of the way that we work together as a society and as a community. We just went on a really nice family holiday. When we get home, could we not revert to being assholes and just doing things the way we were? Could we try to bring some of that holiday spirit home with us?
I'll tell you a thing I really love. I mean, like we've accelerated, I know you're going to do this, but we've accelerated some things. I mean, we're chatting, right? We talked for a few months and you looked at different things and here we are. And I bet you speeded up your request to LinkedIn Live because of this situation, because there wasn't anything to go and do. So you sped it up and here we are talking. So I wonder if people can take a few of these habits forward deliberately and say, I learned it and I'm going to keep it. And I got rid of that. I want a lot of stuff back personally. I want parties and I want travel. You know, there are some cool things that I want back in my life.
I'm shedding a tear at the idea of going to an airport lounge and getting on a plane. Oh,
well, I always go there and then also party. So I'm not shedding a tear. I'm saying to you that maybe when you go traveling, you're wasting an opportunity, Alice. You know, you can judge a person by what they complain about. But if you don't want to travel anymore, we need to choose. And we've been given a few choices. Good place to leave it.
I love it. We need to choose. Hey, you taking the time to jump on your computer all the way on the other side of the world, at crazy o'clock at night and have a chat with me here in New Zealand about strategy and choices and craziness is just so appreciated. And I hope that everybody out there who has watched us chat and will watch us chat over the next few days enjoyed this as much as I do. So, Max, you are a winner. You're amazing. This was fantastic. And I hope that everybody else thought it was pretty great too.
Well, you know, if they didn't.
Who cares?
Have a good evening. Have a good